Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I want to go over how to actually plan out not only your polling sessions in regards to who you want to get in the future and future team compositions, but also when you should consider polling for new units. Because I'm going to be honest, there are a lot of characters in this game, and especially with the release of characters like Adventuring next alongside the rerun of Jingliu and her respective light cone, a lot of people may be considering polling. So this will gloss over the concept of pulling for light cones, as well as something like Eidolon value and when you should go for them. But also more aptly, when is it worthwhile to pull a new DPS? Because let's be honest here, a lot of you may have someone like Acheron, but also a character like Sealy. Or maybe you have a standard character that you haven't used in a while. So right off the rip, I want to say this first and foremost. You can have a bunch of teams in this game, but mostly all of you will be using 1 to 2 teams. Whether this is a mono quantum oriented team, or a team that's built around hyper buffing one character, or even dual DPSs like in this Jingliu Blade composition. Pure Fiction, even though it does sometimes prioritize different things, for the most part, your main teams will work consistently enough that it's not really worthwhile to pull someone purely for Pure Fiction. Now that's a different story if, say, hypothetically speaking, you have a character who is really good in Pure Fiction and you haven't built them yet. For instance, building a Clara out for Pure Fiction can be great. Building a character out like Herta can be great for Pure Fiction. These are characters you already have, so you're not wasting pulls on an additional character or an additional support for that specific character. With that being said, there is one specific thing to consider. What if you want a very different gameplay archetype and you don't have any of the characters for that, relatively speaking? Like, yeah, we can count Sampo and Gwynifen and so on, but you don't have any of the top tier units like that, such as Kafka or Black Swan. Maybe you want to invest into DOT teams and you're like, well, without these two characters, that team is kind of incomplete. In that instance, I will say this. Compared to the likes of either a Mono Quantum team, an Imaginary team, or even Jingliu Blade, a DOT team is very expensive to run. Not necessarily because the units themselves require high investment, though don't get me wrong, some units like Acheron herself do require a lot of effective hit rate. In regards to the units themselves, DOT wants more 5 stars, or at least benefits quite heavily from specific 5 stars compared to most other compositions. Jingliu, for instance, is a very good character, but you don't really need Blade to make her work. Yeah, you can get a Bronya if you want to buff her up a little bit more, but you can also use a Ting Yun, because in that instance, Jingliu is kind of the only DPS of that team. Mono Quantum is a very expensive team to run, but it's also very, very comfy. If you don't have Sparkle, you can theoretically replace her with another character. So long as you aren't too concerned with the concept of weakness breaking, you can kind of run this team anywhere. Or slide out units you don't want. Maybe your Silver Wolf could be better utilized on another team and you're going to slide in a Pella for the same defense down. Great. Mono Quantum worked, relatively speaking, well enough prior to the release of Sparkle. Imaginary, don't get me wrong, has benefited quite heavily from the release of characters like Sparkle, but Danheng / Mbaba Lunai can at least be supplemented with skill point positive characters. DOT teams are still good. Black Swan is a great character for dot teams, but you don't need her. She's just a very good damage buff because she has very high damage on her own. Kafka detonates him. I'd say if you're looking at a DOT team, she is, in my opinion at least, the most integral part to that team. Not that the team can't work, but more so it works so much better with her. I still hate her as a character though. She's very bland, this design isn't even that good. If you like her, you have basic taste. Regardless of that subject, I think that we all kind of know at this point that a DPS is a DPS. Your Acheron is fighting for the same position as your Sealy, as your Jingyuan, your Jingliu, and so on. And so in that position, if you have a bunch of characters who occupy the same role as your main carry on your team, it's kind of iffy to sit down and say, hey, Acheron's really good, I want to use her, because now you're replacing someone. For me, for instance, my Acheron is really just using my Mono Quantum team, except without Sealy. So Sealy has, in that instance, been benched for Acheron. And so, in my opinion, the most important factors to consider are, first off, do you have the team? If you hypothetically put Silverwolf, Sparkle, and Fu Xuan because you like their characters, then yeah, Sealy is going to slot wonderfully into that team composition and it's going to perform wonderfully well because it's very comfy, it's Mono Quantum. But if you're looking at a character like Black Swan, then she's a good unit, but she's not as flexible as other characters like Sparkle or Silverwolf or even Fu Xuan. And so in that instance, if you want to make her work in a very specific team, you want to build up DOT characters. This can be investing into units you don't like, or this can be pulling for brand new units. And so it's a bit more of a difficult consideration. You also want to consider, with certain characters, how bound are they to their signature? Blade, for instance, gets a lot of value from his signature because nothing else is giving you max HP. His second best option would be something like a Secret Vow because Blade is losing HP constantly. But no other light cone is giving him that same amount of value. Clara's gives you attack, he wants HP. Jingliu's, it's Jingliu's. Let's be honest, it's not very flexible. And so in this instance, you don't want to pick up a character who feels awful to use without the signature light cone. A lot of people complain that Jing Yuan feels incomplete without his signature light cone. That can be a problem for you. Maybe you want to consider more free-to-play friendly alternatives. But I know that was a brief tangent, probably half the video. And so first and foremost, my recommendation for any character is you want to build out a solid foundation of supports. I will personally say, I like Fu Xuan a lot, but in my personal opinion, it's better to just have the raw healing. Whether that's going for a HoYoverse, a Luocha, it could be building out a Lynx. Raw healing or outright damage elimination, in this instance it would be Japard's shield, is extremely valuable because there are certain instances where AoE hits can destroy your Fu Xuan's HP and she is no longer benefiting the team because now she's a detriment to it. In those instances, you would rather have heals or just not take damage at all. Secondary, supports. These aren't necessarily in the same vein as characters like Silverwolf because even though Silverwolf is a support, I consider her to be less flexible than the likes of a Sparkle, than the likes of a Bronya. Because these are characters who can work pretty much anywhere, whereas Silverwolf, even though she does do a good job at supporting her team, she is really bound to mono quantum, or at least quantum oriented teams, strictly because she's always going to have a chance of applying a quantum weakness. Your priority will always be what's your sustain, then what is your support. Flexible supports like Sparkle and Bronya, they work wonderfully. You're going to pick buff up standard eventually. And then you can finally build out the rest of your teams. Well, now you have Sparkle, so you can go immediately into an IL, into a Jing Yuan, or an Acheron. You can also build up Mono Quantum, but having that basic foundation is wonderful. If you were a launch player, you remember how god-awful it felt to try and play the game without any form of sustain. If you did not have a Bailu, you had Natasha. Natasha is not on par with any of the other characters who are healers as of right now. She's a good healer, don't get me wrong, but she's not on par with the likes of them. And so your first priority in any team composition, any kind of account building will be what is your sustain to keep your team alive. Then you can build out either around your DPS if you like one specific character, Jing Liu for example, or if you don't have a particular DPS you're fond of, you can build out the rest of that core foundation. Okay, you have your sustain, that's Fu Xuan in this instance. Who's next? Well, I want a decent damage buffer. That's either going to be your Sparkles or your Tingyuns and Yukong. Build out the solid foundation of units who are very flexible. Tingyun is always useful for the attack percentage and energy. Pella is useful for the debuff of defense. Yukong gives crit. These three units are pretty universally applicable. They're useful. I'd say Yukong is the most Eidolon dependent though. Once you have that foundation built out, you can look at a DPS, and you don't want DPSs that overlap. You don't want your Acheron stealing all the teammates from your Sealy team. So instead, you can pick out a Sealy who's going to have her set core teammates, and then pick out an entirely different team. You can invest hypothetically in an entire DOT because those units are bound to each other, or you can invest into a Liu team, or a team under which the character isn't going to steal away supports. Jing Liu I use in this example because she's a great character who doesn't really care much for the mono quantum supports. This can also be a position under which you get a character who brings more value to your older units. Jing Liu brought more value to Blade because she took his HP. I would strongly advise picking out characters not outright just because of how strong they are, but because of what value they're offering your account. If you have an Acheron, or maybe you don't have an Acheron right now, but you don't use your Welt, but you don't use any of these other debuffers, Acheron may bring more value to those older characters, and she's not making you pull for more units in the future as a result. Whereas hypothetically, if you got Celia and you wanted to run Mono Quantum, yeah, Celia was fine without it, but she got so much better with it that it feels like you need a Silverwolf now. Now you need a Sparkle because Celia uses so many skill points. Now you need a Fu Xuan because you need to survive and Lynx isn't doing her job well enough, or Fu Xuan offers too much for you to ignore. Maybe you're an IL main and you really are just tired of not having the skill points for this man. TLDR, just get a support. Get supports, they're great. Please don't pull characters who want you to pull other characters. Just pull one character that you like and then hyper invest either into them via the signature light cone or Eidolons, or just save. That way, if you do like a character like Raiden here, you can just go for more Eidolons on them. Either way, I'll see you next time.